The title of this talk was all about art, but I think that's a little presumptuous. So perhaps a better idea would be a bit about art, and I'll do my best. So here's a quick view on what we're planning on talking about, or what I'm planning on talking about. So we'll do some initial introductions for those that don't know me, and then I'll talk a bit about art and what it's about and what it does. And then, of course, we're going to get onto this dreadful subject of the pandemic and what has art been doing during the pandemic. And then I'm going to move on to what is currently being referred to as the survival and recovery strategy, and looking at what we can do to survive and what we can do to recover once we come out of this. So, a few introductions. This is me, bit off, put the picture up on here, of course, because you've got me on video, I guess. However, just for those who don't know me, I learnt to ring when I was 10 at St Michael's, Kirkby-le-Soken, along with my twin brother. Much of my early ringing was with Frank Lufkin, a former master, who was later elected as an LVP, and I kind of followed his path. I left Kirkby and went to London to study, and while I was there, I learnt to ring handbells. And I learnt to ring handbells by meeting with a group every lunchtime, every weekday lunchtime for a year, little and often. Actually, it's an interesting fact that this was very much the thinking of art a few years later, meeting for intensive practice. So I learnt handbells there. I got introduced to 12-bell ringing, came back to Kirkby. I was tower captain at Kirkby. I was master of the association. I've been an LVP. I am an LVP. I've been a central council rep. So I've been 50 years a member of the Essex Association, which why I put the Essex Association badge up. But my second hat here today is as a member of the Association of Ringing Teachers, which I joined only in 2016. So I'm not an expert. And I went on one of their training courses, despite the fact that I'd been a tutor on the Essex course for 25 years or so. I still found it extremely interesting, and hopefully we can impart a little bit of that today. None of the above qualifies me as either an art expert or indeed as an expert on what is going to happen during the current madness that we're living through and what's going to happen at the end. But in my involvement in art, I have been involved in a number of discussions around a strategy. And so this talk, part of it is to share the current thinking and the ideas behind that, and hopefully provoke some thoughts and discussions, and maybe even some enthusiasm for people who might want to get involved. So that's a quick introduction to me. I thought it might be a bit of fun to find out a little bit about you. So I've got a couple of polls here, and I'm going to launch them. And I'm hoping that you might be able to see a poll up on the screen, which is asking people, when did you learn to ring? Just click, if you can, on when that was. Don't get too hung up about it. This is not like the American elections. There's going to be no lawsuits. It's just a bit of fun just to get a feeling for the split of the audience. And I'll give that another few moments. We've got 78% people have voted. We're nearly there, all 18, couple more. Maybe some aren't able to get to their screen. Nearly there, nearly there, nearly there. And let me close that poll then. So I will share the results so that you can see them. As you can see, I'm going to take a note of that because I might come back to it later. Only 5% less than 2 years. We've got 16% between 2 and 10 years. We've got 21% between 10 and 25. And we've got a good number, 58% learned over 25 years ago. Wow, we have a very good audience here. Good, thank you. So one other one that I was going to try, and that is this one. So another one for you to go. Only 2 to choose from this one. This should be really, really easy. Oh, it's running neck and neck at the moment. How exciting. And we're there. Okay, and let me share the results to that one. So we've got 60% no and 40% yes. That's excellent. Good. Okay, well, thank you for that. I'll bear that in mind as I go through. So, now I know a little bit about you. Let's talk a little bit about what art does. Well, of course, 40% of you are going to know quite well, but hopefully what I'm going to say will match what your experience has been. For most people, art would be those people who give the bell handling training. Oh, there's something to do with teaching bell ringing, aren't they? That is if anyone's heard of us at all. Actually, art's mission statement is to improve the learning experience of all ringers. Doesn't mention teachers at all. Of course, there's an implication that if we're going to improve the learning experience of ringers, we have to do something about the way people were taught. And it's interesting that, what was it, 58% of this crowd learnt 25 years ago, as did I, and probably you were taught quite differently then to the way we're at least trying to go about it now. So it isn't exclusively about teachers. It is all about that learning experience. And why do we do that? Well, frankly, we do it because we need to retain more ringers. And we need those ringers who start to learn to reach their true potential. You know, whatever that might be. It might be ringing rounds and call changes on a Sunday morning for their services when we're allowed to do that. It may be going off and ringing, you know, peals of Maximus and all kinds of stuff. But whatever it might be, we want them to get to where they want to go. And we believe that we need to do things differently if we're going to succeed in that. And doing things differently is a recurring theme of this talk. So, art products, so as well as those teaching courses, which you've got in the top left-hand corner here, art has a whole host of other things going on. There's a learning the ropes scheme, which I'm going to talk about later, which is absolutely aimed at learners. There's a series of art workshops, and those workshops are all about trying to remove barriers to progression. There's workshops on conducting and calling, on simulators, on handbells, on listening and striking, recruitment and retention. So there's a whole host of things quite separate from the main teaching modules. We have some online learning resources, and I'm going to talk about those in a bit more detail later on. We sponsor some art awards. So there are awards given each year by art to people for the use of technology in teaching, for recruitment and retention, for inspiring leadership, and for ringing achievement as a learner. And that doesn't mean that you become a superstar, but you've demonstrated real progress, and perhaps in difficult circumstances. Art has a number of hubs and ringing centres where we're trying to promote art teaching methods and group teaching. And group teaching, again, is a recurring theme that will come up in this talk. We publish newsletters and articles, tower talk and artworks. We organise conferences and festivals, and we have an online shop where we sell all those traditional things like books and DVDs. So it is a big organisation, and there's a lot going on other than just those teaching courses. However, we should go back to those teaching courses, because this is where art started, and it is the thing that most people know us for. And module 1 is the course where we explore the teaching of bell handling. You know, those scary early days when you've got someone on the end of the rope for the very, very first time. And it's where art started back in around 2010 by a lady called Pip Penny, who some of you may know. Pip learnt to ring as an adult, and then went on to get involved with the Kids Ring Out scheme in her neck of the woods, and got into starting to teach. In her working life, Pip was a very experienced physiotherapist, and she spent a lot of her working life teaching people physical skills. So, for example, teaching people to walk again after an accident or a traumatic illness. And what she did is she took her knowledge about how a body learns physical movements, and how you had to break the progress down into tiny little steps that the muscles could actually cope with. And she took those techniques and applied them to teaching people the complicated skill of handling a bell. And those of us that have been ringing 25 years, it's very easy to forget just how complicated that is. But we have to synchronize lots and lots of different things. So Pip took these and she started a series of training schemes, which was initially called the Integrated Teacher Training Scheme. And it became art when art was formed about 2012. So the bell handling module dates back 10 years and has been refined during that time. It is based on the best ideas that have come from, ringers all over the world, in fact, based on best practices, things that we know work and things that we know don't work. It's a mix of theory and practical. So as well as having practical exercises to take people through those steps, there's a series of theory lessons which talk about the why. Why do we do this? How should we approach it? What is it that motivates people? So it's a real mix of different aspects of teaching. One of the things that people got hung up on, certainly in the early days of art, was that they saw it as being very prescriptive. And it's not. It's a toolkit, not a checklist. It gives a box of techniques and a box of tools that you can use at the right time. There are times when you need a hammer and there are times when you need a spanner. And different people respond to different things. So the idea is to produce a suite of ideas that are known to work and allow people to pick them to suit their particular needs. And of course, most important of all, particularly in teaching bell handling, is to do it in a safe environment. And if you're new to teaching, being able to do that with a mentor or in a group environment where someone are guiding you through it is really important. Before I put up those things, you see the picture of a typical Module 1 group. You know, there are very experienced ringers in it. There are people who are older and coming to teaching for the first time, and there are people who are really new. We also get people coming along who just want to watch. They've no interest in teaching themselves, but actually they want to see how it's done because they think that will help them be a better helper if they've got some idea of what their teacher is getting at. And despite everything else I talked about, this is still the most popular course that ARC runs. The next course I was going to talk about is Module 2F, which is in fact the newest course. It is focused on what we call the foundation skills. And the foundation skills in arts world are threefold. First and foremost, there is bell handling. The second is rope sight, and the third is listening. So you have to develop the listening skills to be able to hear when you're in the right place. You've got to develop rope sight to be able to see where it is you're meant to be going. But most important, well, equally important, you've got to develop the bell control skills to be able to get your bell there. And it is art's belief that you need to develop those three side by side. They're like three legs of a stool. Any one missing and the stool is going to be wonky. And that stool provides the foundation with theory to go on to ringing methods. It is vitally important, we believe, for people to make the progress that they are capable of to get those foundation skills right. And actually it isn't just a belief anymore. The Birmingham School of Bell Ringers actually proven the value of that. So I won't talk too much about it because we've got Simon coming tonight to talk about it in detail. But for those who've not heard of it, the Birmingham School of Bell Ringing is a school that teaches bell ringing, and it's in Birmingham. And they run every Saturday, and they have a number of towers open, and each of those towers is focused on a different level as part of the Learning the Ropes scheme. The pupils that come along pay, and their attendance is expected, like it was a school. And all of them are tracked through the Learning the Ropes scheme, so you can see exactly what progress they're making week by week. The Birmingham School of Bell Ringing numbers show, absolutely without doubt, that when they started, they had people coming in at all levels. There were some people that had done quite a lot of ringing and they started at a higher level in the school. But what they have found is that those that came in at level 1 and learnt to handle the bell using the art scheme have overtaken those that started at a higher level. It's the tortoise and the hare. If you get the basics right at the beginning, you have no barriers to progress. But I think most of us will have seen people that have spent ages trying to learn to play and hunt, and they can't do it because fundamentally they don't have the bell control skills or the listening skills to be able to do it. To develop those skills, you have to do loads and loads and loads of practice. And this can be insanely boring for the rest of the band, which is why people get moved on too quickly in our view. And so what Module 2 does is introduce a whole load of fun aspects and different techniques to be able to develop those skills in a varied and interesting way. And then some of you might recognize these people. I mentioned before about learning the ropes. If you have an organized, structured approach to teaching, it stands to reason there must be an organized, structured approach to learning. And this shouldn't be a big surprise to us. Both my kids learnt to play the piano. And if you go to learn to play the piano, you go to a teacher who follows a very well-defined curriculum. There's grade 1, there's grade 2, 4, 5. If you go beyond 5, you have to do a theory, and then there's 6 and 7 and 8, and so on. And wherever you get taught, and whoever you get taught by, it's quite clear that if you've passed piano grade 4, people will know what level of pieces you are able to play, and what scales you know, and what arpeggios and the rest of it. And what art has done with learning the ropes is to bring that same kind of uniformity across the world to teaching of ringing. I learned 50 years ago, 58% of you learned more than 25 years ago. My suspicion is that most of you had very little idea about what was going on. You turn up to a practice, certainly I did, and you would be told, we're going to do this. What the learning the ropes does is set out a curriculum for the person who's learning. They can see where they're going, they can see what they still have to learn. Most importantly of all, you get access to a logbook which lets you check off week by week how you're getting on. Allows you the progress that you're making, because let's all face it, we've all had those periods in our ringing career where sometimes you wonder if you're making any headway. What this does is allow you just to go back and say, well, you know, it was a month ago I couldn't do that, and I can now. So it is very much about enhancing that learning experience, and it works for the teachers as well. It certainly supports group teaching. Over at Ardley, where we have an art hub, we were teaching a bunch of year 6 school children before all this madness happened. And in there we had typically 3 or 4 teachers and maybe 6 or 7 or sometimes even 8 youngsters. So you didn't have a one-to-one anymore. Different students would be with different teachers on different times during the practice. And what that logbook does is allow you to see exactly where someone is and make sure that you can pick up exactly where you've left off. Here's another aspect of what art is up to. It's called the 50 Ringing Things. It's a little booklet available from the shop. You can sign up to the scheme, and it basically gives you a whole load of different challenges. Things that you might have done, some of them you might already have done, but it encourages people to go out and try things that perhaps they hadn't done before. Trying handbells, helping with a ringer's tee, splicing a rope, doing a bit of maintenance. And as you do those, you can click those off, and I'll come back to that. Again, aimed not just at learners, but some very experienced ringers have picked up and been through this course. So art was really busy. Just a flavour of some of the things that we were up to. March 2020 was the art conference at Hilton in Derbyshire. We had 120 people in a room for 2 days. Remember those days? Rule of 6, no one had ever heard of it. No one thought anything of it. There was not a mask in sight. We shared biscuits and cakes and all kinds of things. But 120 people came to that conference, all kinds of speakers. Really interesting one on climbing Everest, which has more parallels with learning ringing than you might first think. We had an excellent presentation from Richard Grimmett and Colin Newman on striking, very much focus on striking. Richard Grimmett, for those of you who don't know, was the leader of the 12-bell band that won the national 12-bell competition 8 times in the last 10 years, including 5 years in a row. And he was there talking about the importance of the foundation skills if you are going to be able to develop your striking. At that point, you know, art was really, really busy. We'd run 64 M1 and M2 courses in the previous year. So that's more than 1 a week. We'd had 570 people attend them. There'd been 170 new teachers being accredited. We'd issued nearly 1,200 learning the ropes certificates showing progress for learners. We'd had £14,000 worth of sales from the art shop, of books and DVDs and so on. You know, the world was busy. And then in the space of 24 hours, we went from this to this. It all stopped. Within 24 hours, without any exaggeration, my diary went from not being able to put another thing in it, even though I'm retired, to being completely empty. And I'm sure it happened to you all. It just ground to a complete halt. And it was in many ways such a shame, because people had left that conference infused, fired up, you know, ready to take the world by storm. And then all of a sudden it stopped. All of the art planned courses had to stop. The shop had to close. It was just a real blow for art, as it was for everybody else. That said, in the early days of the pandemic, when people thought it wasn't going to go on that long, there was a kind of sense of serenity in some ways. Speaking personally, it was lovely to have an empty diary. And the first thing for art was to check that we could survive, particularly financially. And I'm very pleased to report that art is in a very strong financial position. Our expenditure is tied very closely to our income. So, you know, whilst we have no income because we're not running any courses, equally, we don't have the expenditure associated with those either. We run a very prudent ship. So actually, we are able to dismiss that as a concern very early on. And in keeping with most of us as individuals, what that quiet gave us a chance to do was to look at those overdue jobs. You know, that there was gardening to be done, there were sheds to be painted, there was greenhouses to be cleared out. There was time to do stuff, and art used that time to address some jobs that you really, really had been planning to do but never had the chance. So, you know, it had grown very quickly. Some of our processes and procedures were groaning, and they were only working because people were working very hard under the covers. So it gave us a chance to rework many of those. We redesigned financial systems and websites, and we're in the middle of a major revamp of the Smart Ringer website, where all of the Learning the Ropes information is held. And it gave us a chance to review existing resources. So I, for one, have been working on the M2 courses and revamping many of those. And those early days, I know not good for everyone, but for most people, they were okay. People organised social gatherings. We learnt new things like Zoom that we're all on now, and we don't think, you know, much about it at all. There were quiz nights. By the end of March, Ringing Room had appeared. I mean, how amazing was that? And by the end of March, actually, not only had it appeared, but people were ringing quarter peals on it. So the early days were kind of okay. But as the impact of the pandemic became much more prevalent on ringers, you know, people really began to miss that loss of routine. We didn't know what day of the week it was. We didn't get up and go ringing on Sundays. We didn't have Tuesday night practice. We lost the friendship. We missed out on, you know, just meeting up with people and the banter in the pub after the ringing. We had no opportunity to go out and do the things that we wanted to do, you know, in any sense, not just in ringing, but, you know, the ability to drop in on someone's practice and know that you'd get a warm welcome had all gone. And of course, the physical activity, we just weren't doing any kind of similar movement. If you put that into context, If you're a routine ringer that went to, say, 3 practices a week and rang a few touches, you were probably doing something around 3,000 repetitions of stretching up and down, of flexing your fingers, of bending your elbows, of bending your knees if you rang round the back end. 3,000 repetitions a week to 0 in the space of 24 hours. Incidentally, if you're a really mad keen peel ringer and you're ringing 150 peels a year, that's 15,000 repetitions a week. And actually, just last week, I was talking to a mate of mine who is one of those 150 peels a year people, and he was expressing serious concern about coming back to ringing and how he was going to cope, because he felt the arthritis in his fingers had got considerably worse while he had not been ringing. And he, as I say, had gone from 15,000 exercises per week to nothing. So it really began to bite. And it really began to bite when the second lockdown came. There was a gradual return to ringing, and people sort of saw the starts of a recovery. And then all of a sudden we get locked down again. The weather's less good, the sheds are painted, the nights are cold. And there has been a real upturn in social media about people asking about what's going on. And you ask what art could or should be doing during these strange times. Well, actually, you might not have seen much of it, but art has been extremely busy. We saw our role as being very largely unchanged. You know, regardless of the very strange circumstances, we still saw our role as teaching and encouraging and sharing information and trying to motivate people to improve the learning experience. But we couldn't do it in the same way. And so we've had to change. And one really fundamental change in art is the way we have made our resources available to. That started before lockdown, to be fair, but it accelerated greatly once we were all confined to barracks. And what we've done is we have moved a whole load of our resources from behind the login that was available only to ART members into our main website. So a recruitment and retention workshop toolkit was moved over into the mainstream. And that was in fact picked up by the Central Council VNL work group as the basis for their workshop. We've moved a simulator toolkit over there, and that has information on how to build a simulator, but for most of us, more importantly, how to set one up, how to use it, how you can use it for teaching, and we've had some courses on that this morning. We revamped the method toolkit and moved that over, and interestingly, we added a whole section on minimus methods. So when the easing came and people were able to go back into the tower and ring on smaller numbers of bells, the ability to ring something more than just plain hunt on 4 was really useful. So there's a whole load of interesting little minimus methods in that toolkit for people to have a go at. And of course, learning the ropes handbells, we completely revamped that and we've made that available to all. And handbells has been one of the beneficiaries of this current lockdown. There's been more handbell ringing going on in the last 9 months than ever before. It's been a real resurgence. And it's something you can practice at home on one of the many simulators, Able, Virtual Belfry, Bell Tower. You can do handbells on Ringing Room as well. There's Handbell Stadium, if you haven't seen that, fabulous online resource. Now we have the availability of the new e-bells that those of you who are on early would have seen Andrew was showing. They are 3D printed handbells, but they've got motion sensors inside. You plug them into your PC. You can use them with Ringing Room. And it's as real a simulation of real handbell ringing as you can get without having real handbells. 138 of those handbells were sold on the morning that their availability was announced. 138 in one morning. Just goes to show how much has been going on handbells, and art has been very much involved in that. And as well as moving existing resources over, we have also created a whole load of new resources, which some of you may have seen, but if not, I encourage you after, not now, but after this talk to go and have a look at. We created a COVID support page, and I've got a screenshot of this. So this is the Association of Teachers a standard web page. It's www.ringingteachers.org. But if you search for Ringing Teachers, or if you search for art, Google's not going to help you too much. But if you search for Association of Ringing Teachers, you'll find it. And there is a link in the resources to COVID ringing support. And it's a page which is way too big to get on a PowerPoint presentation, but it's got information on it, but importantly, it's got links all over the place. So links to all those other people, including the Central Council, links to their guidance notes, links to Ringing Room and other online ringing resources, Dean, Muster, and so on. Really, really worthwhile having a look at. We created a YouTube channel, and again, loads of information on there. Introduction to Ringing Room, how to use Zoom, not that any of you will need that because you're on this call, but handbell basics again, how to use Able and Virtual Belfry, well worth having a look at. There's tons of stuff. We also have some of the presentations from our conferences that you can dip back into and have a look at. We've created a new online learning portal, and again, a screenshot of that, available to all. It's, again, if you search for online learning bell ringing, it will come up, but it's onlinelearning.bellringing.org. We'll share these links afterwards for those that are interested. It covers, traditional art subjects such as plain hunt and call changes, but it also goes on to more advanced stuff, composing and method splicing. None other than Simon Linford did a session for us, which he recorded and put on there. And there's some slightly odd ones for art, things that we're not generally associated with. There's one on maintenance. And it's not a deep dive, but it was done in time for the return to ringing, or the partial return to ringing, to give people an idea on what they should be looking for if they were going up the tower. And there's things on rope splicing and so on. And then the art shop reopened as well. And there's been a steady trickle of things. Again, handbell books have been the most prominent since we started. So all of that has been going on during the lockdown. I mentioned it before, but the reimposing the lockdown after the second lockdown, after the return to ringing, created a real sea change in people's opinions. I think people saw that things were getting better, and then all of a sudden they weren't, and we're in for the long haul. And what that did is it triggered a joint initiative between art and the Central Council to come up with what we've formed a survival and recovery strategy. How are we going to keep ringing going? How are we going to maintain motivation over the winter? And equally, though, longer term, we need to prepare plans for recovery. So right at the moment, the focus is on survival. How do we get people through that short term? And it is a bit like, hence the picture, it's a bit like finding a path through the forest. This lockdown is a bit like the forest. You've no idea when it's going to come to an end. You don't really know which way to go. Everywhere looks the same. And the survival strategy is trying to carve a path through that and give someone a way to keep them motivated. I am reminded of the great explorer Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who, you know, was one of these traditional British, I was going to say eccentric, you know, I think that would be a fair word. You know, he's done all kinds of strange things like walking across Antarctica on his own, and he is the oldest British man to climb Everest. He succeeded on his third attempt. One of his previous attempts, he had failed, and he said that the reason that he didn't make it was because he had been all the time focused on how far there was still to go. He could see what he thought was the summit in front of him, and he would, you know, set himself up to get there, only to find that when he got to that summit, it was actually a false summit. There was a col behind it, the land dropped away and then rose up even higher further on. And he had a number of those where he thought he'd got there and he hadn't. And this is very much like I think people are seeing this second lockdown. We thought we'd got out of it and now we haven't. His third and successful venture, he attributed to his new mantra. And his new mantra was, plod forever. Plod forever. All you need to worry about is what you're going to do now, right now. What am I going to do? I'm going to get one foot in front of the other. I'm going to make sure it's well placed before I lift up my standing foot, and I'm going to move that. And the survival strategy is about plodding forever, finding things to keep people motivated in the short term. So these meetings are already going on. We had another one yesterday. One of the things that's come out of that is that we need to be really clear to people about what is going on and getting at the grassroots ringers, because there was a feeling that nothing was going on, which is not the case. So in that survival strategy, there's a whole load of things which Art was already working on, but we've brought as part of this. There's a new ringing room workshop for helping people run online practices, and we ran it earlier this morning, 9:30. Some of you were actually on it. We've launched a new 50 virtual ringing things, which is on the Art website, which is very similar to the one I talked about before, but these are all little challenges that we can get stuck into whilst we're not able to go and get in our towers. There's a minor stepping stones linked to that, which is a series of methods that people might like to have a go at, akin to the Ringing World Pathways, for those who've seen them, to take people through a series of nice, simple stepping stones from plain bob through to surprise minor. What method should I move on to next and give it a go? We're planning some surprise major ringing room practices to try and attract those middle tier of ringers. If you look at ringing room, people have rung surprise maximus. There was a peal this morning of, was it 146 splice surprise minor was rung. And there are loads and loads of performances of people learning to ring plain hunt. But there are nowhere near as many in the middle, and we're trying to encourage experienced ringers to get in and at least keep their hand in. The Bellboard Virtual Hub was launched last week. So if you go onto Bellboard, you'll find a link in there, and it advertises all of the things that are going on online, including this talk, incidentally. But all guilds and associations are being encouraged that if they're putting online activities which are suitable for all, to advertise them so that everyone has got a place to go and see what's happening. And we're encouraging people to do more of these kind of social events, getting people together, doing talks, doing webinars to keep people interested. If you look around, there is a host of stuff online to keep people going. And so, having talked about survival, we want to turn our attention to recovery. What do we do when eventually we could start to come out? And if we're going to talk about recovery, we need a kind of understanding of what the world is going to look like. What is the landscape going to look like when we get out of this forest? The answer is no one knows, not even those experts on Twitter that appear to know everything about anything that's going on. But we can have some educated guesses, and the strategy group's current thinking about what ringing will look like is on this screen here. It is highly likely, one might even say inevitable, that we're going to lose ringers. There will be ringers who will not come back. They've lost physical conditioning, as I talked about before. There may be newer recruits that just decide that, you know, maybe it wasn't for me, and I'm not going to go back to it. I'm not going to do. People have found other hobbies. I think we can all anticipate that we will lose ringers, and those that come back may well do less. You know, some of those peel ringers I've been speaking to are saying, you know, why did I spend all my time ringing peels? There are lots and lots of other things that I could do. They have new hobbies. There may be experienced ringers who want a better life balance. You know, many of us got sucked into it and became extremely busy. There may be teachers who feel that, do you know what, I'm not sure I can go through that again. I built up this band. I got people to a certain level, and I don't know that I can do it. There may be towers that fall silent because of that. They will simply not have enough ringers to ring. There may well be a drop in the quality of ringing because you can't get enough experienced ringers together to do anything more advanced. And that's all somewhat negative, but equally there are some positives we see. During this lockdown, we have seen real enthusiasm from churches and communities to hear the bells again. I've only rung a couple of times since March. One was for a wedding, where we just rang a few bells, and one was a special invitation to ring the bells for Harvest Festival for a church. And even though we couldn't ring all the bells, we only rang a few. The number of comments that we had, and indeed, you know, the requests to ring. If we go back to February, how many churches would have put a request into their ringers to ring specifically? There has been a real recognition of ringing and its value to the church, and people have really missed it. And we've seen new leadership emerging. A number of people, you know, have already said, you know, I'm stepping down from roles. And in our strategy group, we've seen a number of people come forward who are quite new to any leadership role and are taking that on willingly. So whilst we lose some people, we leave space for others to grow into it. So it's not all negative. The point about the recovery strategy is to have something in the top drawer for the right time. We have no idea when it's going to be, you know, and it really is futile trying to predict it. Your hopes get dashed. You have these false summits that Ranulph Fiennes struggled with. But we need to be ready for when it does happen. And I think we need to recognise that ringing will be different. We may not be able to have the same kind of open practices that we've been used to. We may need to be looking at invited practices to get people together. We may well need bands to band together, to work together to survive. And actually, as a recent example of that, down in Cornwall, when they had a return to ringing, where a number of the churches there just put a team together and they did the road tour. They went from church to church in order to keep them going. We may need to change that view that we all, or that world that we all grew up in, which is one band, one tower. That may not be possible in the future. And we know that one size will not fit all. The return to ringing, whenever it will be, is unlikely to be a big bang event. It's going to happen gradually. And what works in some areas will not work in others. And we've seen that. There's been some quite vociferous conversations on social media about the partial return to ringing and who wants to do what and who doesn't. We know that it will be different in different areas and different towers, and even within a tower. And we need to be conscious and we need to be sensitive to that as we go. And more than anything, the success of any kind of recovery is going to be dependent on the local leadership, a local driver, and the willingness of people to change the way they do it. Working harder, doing things the way we used to, may not be the best way to do it. And it's something that Art and Central Council are working on actively. There is an activities list of some 30 ideas at the moment that span survival and recovery, initiatives and ideas and things that need to happen. They're not daft, they're not wacky. Some of them have already started, and about 75% of them have got names against them for people who are leading them. So this really is moving forward, even though particularly the recovery, we can't trigger anything yet. So what are those things that we're looking at for recovery, as and when? Well, there's 3 strands, and the first one is to get fit for ringing again. You know, I talked about the exercise that we have not been doing. We believe that people will need to be eased back into it. As those first shoots appear, people will need to get back into physical condition. The possibility of doing things that many people have been doing during lockdown. There's been online Pilates and Zumba classes and exercise classes. And I know I have to clear out of the front room here every so often on the mornings while Jill and Lizzie are doing their online Pilates. Why can't we do something like that to get people back into ringing? We need to build confidence again. I said I did one bit of ringing for Harvest Festival. The band that wanted to ring it was super keen, but super nervous. They had not rung since March. And the reason that I went along was because they asked me to go, because they wanted someone they saw as being an experienced teacher alongside them when they first took their tentative steps back into ringing. My presence wasn't needed other than a confidence boost. They were perfectly capable of getting hold of a rope, and that all rang really well. And actually, we had some really nice ringing, limited as it was. But it is clear, and we've seen this echoed all over the place, people lack confidence, and we need to find a way of doing that. We have I have a thought about a post-hibernation gathering, getting people together just to have a first go, maybe not a proper practice, but just getting all those people who are also nervous together with a few experienced ringers, just to get back into the swing of it. We're talking at the moment, we're actively looking at updating the simulator network so we can get people access to simulators to practice before they need to get into it. And in the art world specifically, we have a number of people that had been on art courses and were then never able to put that into practice. And so we're looking at online and physical refresher courses for those that suddenly got hit by lockdown to give them a go at it. And we will run small courses, maybe even at a loss, to get people in and back at it again. So that's all about getting fit for ringers. The second strand is we need to replace those lost ringers and teachers. Largely that's part of the survival strategy, of course. We want to minimize the losses in the first place. And one of the things that we're specifically targeting is what we call the lockdown learners. We talked about it in the virtual session this morning. There are a significant number of ringers whose ringing theory has progressed dramatically during the lockdown. I've heard of people that have been calling Stedman triples in ringing room who can only actually plain hunt in a belfry. There are, people that have gone off and rung a few leads of Bristol Maximus on ringing room who can only ring plain bob. Yeah, they've cheated because they've had the crib sheet beside them, but their theory has moved on well beyond their bell control. And we need to address those and make sure that as they come back into the tower, we can focus on those bell control skills and marry them up. Now, that should be good, because normally when you're learning to plain hunt for the first time, you're learning new bell control skills and the new theory and the rope sight and the counting and all that going on in your head. Well, if you've done the rope sight and you've done the counting and you've got the theory from ringing room, all you have to concentrate then, all he says, but you only really need to concentrate on the bell control. And we do see blended learning, the mixture of online and real ringing continuing when we come back out of lockdown. Ringing room's not going to go away. How lucky are we that we have a resource like ringing room to keep us going? There's no way it's going to get discarded. And as I say, there are real positives to what we've been doing. But again, in terms of replacing, we need to think differently. And part of that is targeting lapsed ringers. I don't know how many of you are aware, but in 2019, ART ran a survey on lapsed ringers. Over 40% of those that responded to that survey who were lapsed could ring surprise minor. 40% of the lapsed ringers that responded to that survey could ring surprise minor. 60% could ring Grancer and plain bob. What a fabulous resource that could be if we can get them back. And maybe if we're doing things differently, they might be motivated to come back. We certainly want to go after them. And then the third strand is motivation and leadership. And this is a big one and a tough one. We need to train those new leaders. That if people are not going to come back, a number of the older people who may have been the tower captains may not come back. We will have a whole load of new tower captains to train. So we're looking at courses and workshops to be able to help people into that. We may be able to do that, virtually, and form a network of those new teachers to give each other encouragement. But it also needs to be driven by guilds and associations, which is why we're keen to do this talk to as many people as we can to get them in the mindset to do that. We may need to rethink practices, as I said before. For those bands that are struggling with numbers, we're looking at a new learning the ropes for call changes. Method ringing may not be the goal for everyone who starts ringing. I certainly know a local ringer that I've helped to teach who had no interest in learning methods. Well, there's a whole band of people down in Devon and Cornwall who are supremely brilliant ringers who ring rounds and call changes of a form. And that is a lifetime challenge for them to get better and better. Why can't we do that in the traditional scientific ringing community and recognise that there are people that may well want to progress without moving on to method ringing? And we need to continue to develop the relationships that I talked about before. Develop the relationships with the church and the communities, and keep those positive thoughts going, and make best use of them. We are seeing a number of people already inquiring about learning to ring while we're in lockdown. And it's very difficult to do too much about it, but they are really key. And so that kind of brings us to the end. So the final thought, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, quite a lot to cram in. I can't see all the videos at the moment, so I'm not sure how many people are still here and how many people are asleep. But final thoughts, this whole shenanigans since March has been a massive shock to ringing and art as well. But art will survive and ringing will survive, and we are actively working on ways through it. It is an opportunity to equip for the next 10 years. Systems, processes, practices, culture, ideas. It's a big reset button to look at and think about how we're going forward. And art sees itself as having a real role, both during this lockdown and after. And I hope that's been interesting. I hope you're still with me. I'll stop sharing, and then I'll be able to see some faces, and maybe a pleasant surprise that there's still a few people with me.
Well, I'm sure we'll.
I'll hand back to you.
Yes. Fantastic. I mean, I think it's been a really good sort of distillation of all the things that are probably running through our brains and worrying us and everything. And it's kind of heartening to see that somebody's got hold of it and is putting it into some sort of shape. So David did say that he's happy to take some questions if anybody.
I don't think I used the word happy.
Well, he said he would. Although there may be a bit too much to think about at the moment, but certainly really interesting. So yes, is there anything anyone would like to ask?
This is Tim, Beth, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, David. That was a really excellent talk. Very inspiring. I just had a question when we do get back after all this business to the refresher courses you mentioned. Is there a plan for the modules for people like me who were fortunate enough to be able to do the module 1 and module 2, but never got as far as the accreditation? Will there be sort of refreshers for people like us?
Absolutely. In fact, exactly for people like you, Tim. So one of my jobs, which I've been remiss at because I've been putting talks together, is to actually create a version of the M2 course that we can run online. And all of those people that have ever done an M2 course will be invited to sign up and to do that. And the other thing in parallel with that is that ART has pressed the freeze button on the timescales for accreditation. So all of this time when we can't do anything, we recognise we can't do anything. So the clock is not ticking. Once we're able to, we will produce these refresher courses, and we when we're allowed, we may well also run them, properly. We'll have a quick revamp. We know you've been on it before, but come along, let's run another one and trigger those ideas again. And then once we're able to do that, people can then move on down the accreditation path. So absolutely, we recognise, if your brain's anything like mine, a course that you went on 9-12 months ago, yeah, I remember it, and I remember it was interesting, but do I remember all of the nuances of that and the details? No, I don't. So we will go back to those and open them up for anyone who's been on a course. And not just those who just been on a course. We all need to get back to teaching. none of us have done any kind of teaching other than virtual. None of us have certainly done any bell control teaching. It'll be over a year by the time we get back, let's face it, well over a year.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Leslie?
David.
Oh, Trevor first?
Leslie, you had your hand first there. Do you want to go first?
No, you carry on.
Yeah, David, thank you. Awesome. It's the first time I really delved into art, and I'm amazed by how much is in it, really. So my question is really around timescale. So if is the Learning to Bell Ropes course the first one? Is that like a day course, or is that a whole weekend, or how does it work? And then if it is a longer course, what sort of numbers of people would you need to have like come to the bespoke course locally, so come to us rather than us go to you guys, sort of thing?
Brilliant question. Brilliant question. So both the bell handling and the foundation courses are day courses. They're pretty intensive day courses. Usually kick off at 9, and then we kick people out 4:30, 5, exhausted and full to the brim. Normally, we would run a course with 8 or 10 or 12 people. Normally, but we recognize that, you know, and we've done that because people have traveled distances to go on one of those courses. We recognize that when we first get back into this, we may not be able to do that. So we may run local courses with maybe 3 or 4 people who are keen, just to get it going, you know, and there is no substitute for enthusiasm. So each is normally a day. Just as a matter of interest, in Australia, they run an art weekend, because for most people in Australia, they have to travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to their nearest tower. No one does that for a day course. So actually what they do is they put on a ringing weekend, they get people in perhaps on a Friday night and have a social do. They'll run one module on the Saturday, one module on the Sunday, and make a whole weekend of it. The other thing I would point out, you don't have to do module 1 before module 2. We've got many people that are teaching foundation skills who aren't really interested in the bell handling. That's not for them, and vice versa. So you can do either module in either order. It's not a progressive curriculum, if you like, in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Leslie? You need to unmute yourself, Leslie. There we go. That's it.
I think David's partially answered what I was going to ask, actually. I was going to say, I know you can go on to module 2 without doing module 1, but do you recommend doing module 1, David, even if you've been ringing for a long time?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, as I said before, I'd been teaching for 20-something years before I went on module 1. And I really enjoyed the day. For me, it gave an insight into the thinking behind it. I'd always, you know, it sounds big-headed, but I'd always been confident with the practical aspects. These are the things that you do to get someone to learn to handle a bell. But what it gave is a real insight to the thinking. Why do you do that? What is that doing inside the person's head? What are the challenges that you've got to get instilled into that person to do it? I found it fascinating. And since I've been running those courses, not just going on them, I ran one down in Reading, and I had someone on the course who in the early introductions introduced him as someone as, well, I've come along because someone said I should, but I really don't believe in all this stuff. And by the end of it, he went away and said, do you know what? There is something in this, and it is worthwhile. And actually art experiences, the people that tend not to like art have probably never been on it. And the people that have been on it tend to understand more about what it's about. If you're not involved in it, you have your own perception about what it's all about. So even if you're a skeptic, I would say, look, it's a day. It's just one day. Come along and try it. And if you're proved right, well done. You can turn around and say, well, I told you so. But who knows? You might just go away like I did and think, do you know what? It's good.
Okay, thanks, David.
Andrew?
Thank you, David. That was a really, really great talk. In the same way that we've started to use things like A-bells to supplement tower bell ringing, how do you envisage us using Ringing Room to supplement real face-to-face ringing in the future? Because we've evolved, haven't we, from thinking it's a poor replacement for real ringing to realising it's actually got a place of its own in teaching and developing ringing. So do you have a vision of how that's going to work in the future?
I have a vision that it will work in the future, and exactly how, no, it's something we're working through. So one of the things that Art is talking about right now is, I talked about the M2, the foundation skills. So using Ringing Room and other simulators for developing the foundation skills. We ran a session on that earlier today. So that's in train. But given the restrictions and how long they might go on, we are actively looking at what can we do about teaching bell handling. I know you can't do the physical stuff, but is there something that you could get at least explaining the challenges? We don't have an answer to it at the moment, but I am absolutely convinced in my mind that the rapid take-up of technology that has happened in the ringing community since March is amazing. I had a copy of Able, which I bought. I mentioned it this morning, so those of you who are on that, excuse me. I bought my copy of Able in 2002. I had it on an old PC, and then you do those things. Your PC breaks, you get a new one. I never got round to installing it until March this year. I tell you, I have thrashed Able more since March this year than I did in the previous 18 years. And you look at Zoom, you know, not naming any names, but Jill's dad Zooms. If there is a more technically illiterate person around, no, there will be, but you know what I mean. He's not au fait with computers, but he's learnt to use Zoom. We've all learnt to do things that we had not done before. The take up of the technology, because the world demanded it, has been amazing. And I do not, as I said before, I do not see that going away. We have to work out how, now that technology is here, how we can harness it alongside the traditional teaching methods. We need to do things differently.
Perhaps I could just say, as an example of that, of the 5 courses that are happening today, 2 of the tutors have run sessions earlier in the week to go through the theory and discuss the background to what they're going to be doing today, so that their students had time to look at that, revise it before they came to ring. And if we had been running this in a tower, I mean, that wouldn't have been possible. You would never have been able to get all those people together for an extra session. And so I think that's just been brilliant, and I can't see why we wouldn't be doing that in the future.
And just picking up on that, just as an example, you know, just for things that are going on, there's a lady called Laura Goodin who during lockdown has been teaching non-ringers to ring. Obviously not real bells, but she's put together a program of 4 lessons, and she's taken people who know nothing about ringing, other than that she's really keen on it, which is how they got involved in it. She's taken them from nothing to ringing plain hunt in 4 sessions, all online. And I talked before about learning handbells in short, sharp bursts when I was at university. There are people that have learnt to ring handbells during lockdown that have never picked up a bell before. And in fact, if you look on Bellboard, there's been a couple of quarters where people have rung their first quarters, and it's first blows in the method on real bells. They've done all of their practice online, virtually, and then went from there and picked up handbells and rang a quarter. So, there are things that we can do. It's got to be different to the way we used to do it. And I think we're still exploring exactly how we do it.
Lovely. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, just really to say a big thank you, David. I think it's been a brilliant talk, very interesting, lots of things for us to think about going forwards, and really great to talk about going forwards rather than us all thinking about what we're missing. So thank you all for coming, and as I say, thank you, David, for talking to us.